I'm a people pleaser. I'm a control freak. Well, I'm just a perfectionist. What do all those statements have in common? They're labels, labels which we apply to ourselves, labels which you might apply to yourself. Labels are what you call yourself in your head. They're like the tags you attach to describe the person who you think you are. But are you? And what happens when you label yourself one way or another? Welcome to episode 97 of the Confident at Work podcast, where we're going to be talking about labels. Where do they come from? What do they sound like? What happens when you label yourself one way or another? And I'm going to give you 3 examples to walk you through exactly what I see happening when you label yourself one way or another. Then I'm going to invite you to explore the labels you have for yourself. And I'm going to give you an exercise to work out whether you want to keep them or whether you want to remove them. So, where do labels come from? How did we end up with these ideas about ourselves, with these labels that we attach to ourselves like little tags? How did that happen? Well, I think some of them have been given to us throughout our lives. So maybe somebody said when you were a kid, you're this or you're that, or you are a X or you are a Y. And maybe that was a label that they gave to you. Maybe society gave you some labels before you even arrived in the world that are to do with who you are or where you're from or your circumstances in life. And maybe some of those labels have actually been given to you by you. So maybe there's come a point in your life where you've thought, well, the evidence suggests that I am just this. Or even one thing happens and you decide, I'm that. Labels can be like an attempt to understand ourselves, to classify ourselves. And they can be helpful, maybe, if you're using them as a sort of helpful shorthand, but they can also be difficult and they can be destructive. And they can get in the way of your progress, your success, your confidence. And that's what I want to talk about today. Because I see people applying labels to themselves all over the place in conversation, in coaching calls, and I really notice it. So I'm trained to notice it because I'm a coach. I want to know what your model of the world looks like. I want to know who you think you are because who you think you are is partially what's getting you the result or the situation that you're in right now. And given that you're coming to me as a coaching client or you're listening to this podcast, there's probably something that you think you would like to be slightly different. And labels are one of the things that can subtly, oh so subtly, tie us and tether us to the place where we are now, which may be different than the place you want to be. So recently, I've been trained in hypnosis. And this has caused me to think about this issue of labels again and slightly differently. So, when somebody is in a kind of hypnotic state, I am going to be talking to them. I'm going to be leading them through things. And it's that is what we call hypnotic suggestion. And when someone's in that really nice, relaxed, calm, focused state, that like trance-like state, you can suggest things to people's subconscious and their conscious. And those suggestions can take up root. So you want to make sure that all of the time you're making positive suggestions and suggestions that take them towards the thing they want and away from the thing that they don't want. And now when I'm noticing people applying labels to themselves, like for instance, well, I'm quite lazy. I will notice that to me is like hypnotic suggestion. So every time you make that statement, every time you say, well, I'm just a bit lazy, that is a hypnotic suggestion, which is being listened to by your subconscious. Even if you're not that consciously aware of how you're describing yourself and the impact that it's having, your unconscious is aware. Now, let's say that we were doing a nice hypnotic process and I was saying to you, so you're just lazy and you're a perfectionist and you're a people pleaser. You would not want me to be saying those things. right? That is not what you're going to want me to hypnotically suggest to you. And yet, if you are labeling yourself and you're routinely spitting out these labels as if they're just the facts and as if you're just reporting the news and they're true, then you are using hypnotic suggestion on yourself. And it could be having more of an impact than you think. So I thought about the kind of labels that I hear people applying to themselves within the work that I do. And that people pleaser one I hear all the time. Label people pleaser. Label perfectionist. Label workaholic. Label overthinker. Label control freak. Label overachiever. Label multitasker. Label peacekeeper. Label invisible. Label helper. Label reliable. Label stressy. Label emotional. Label a failure. Label an idiot. And you may add more to that list. So let's first look at those labels which could be useful for you. And I'm going to give you a little example of one that I found useful. That lazy one that I told you about was actually mine. I had this idea, and I had no idea consciously that I really thought this about myself until I was talking to my business coach. And this was when I had a full-time job, busy job, responsible job, and I was also running my coaching business part-time until I started running the business full-time. And she said something about what I was doing. There was a lot of different things that I was doing. There was a lot that I was setting for myself and achieving. And she kind of questioned me on that. And when we got down to it, I said, well, it's because I'm kind of lazy. Like as a person, I'm kind of quite lazy. And she looked at me very quizzically. And I could tell in that moment she was thinking, what? And it dawned on me that as I'd been telling her about all of these things that I was doing, all of this progress that I was making, I was also calling myself lazy. And I was like, hang on a minute. I've got a full-time job and I'm running a business on the side that I've had to qualify for and get started with. I'm doing all of that. And yet the label that I have for myself is lazy. I think I'm lazy. And in that moment, I was like, what? I'm not lazy at all. I'm like the opposite of lazy. And so that like busted that label out of my head. But how interesting that that label was driving me to really do more than one person should have done. Because I thought I was lazy and I was trying to prove otherwise. Now, that's just one tiny example of how we can inadvertently end up with a label, either that we give ourselves or that somebody else gives us, and it subtly has an impact on us until we realize, wait a minute, what happens when I have that label? Do I even like that label? Is it even right? In my case, it wasn't even right. And I want to give you 3 examples of what happens when you label yourself one way or another. So in my example, you can see that when I'd subtly thought that my label was lazy, I was doing all this stuff to make sure that I wasn't lazy. And I didn't even know I was doing it. Bless me, I didn't even know that that's what I was doing, but I was. There it was in my unconscious mind, directing operations behind the scenes to make sure that I definitely wasn't lazy. So I want to give you 3 examples. And they're the examples that I talked about in the beginning. I'm a people pleaser, I'm a control freak, and I'm a perfectionist. And I want to just give you those examples to walk you through some of the stuff that I see happening if you apply this particular label to yourself. Now, let's look at this first one. I am a people pleaser. So let's say this is your label. You just say it as if it's the truth. I am a people pleaser. That's not what I do, it's just who I am. And I'm in a meeting where they're asking for a volunteer. I know that my plate is completely full and fuller than some of the other people's who are on this meeting. However, what happens next when I believe that I am a people pleaser? I see that nobody else is sticking their hand up to volunteer. And I say, I can do it. Notice that? Do you think that having the identity of people pleaser could be subtly impacting that person's response. Yes or no? Do you think that their identity as a people pleaser could be determining what happens next? Because if you're a people pleaser, you gotta please people. That's the rule. It's who you believe yourself to be. It's just what you do. It takes away an active choice. It takes away a decision. And your brain loves that. Your brain loves to run on pattern and prediction rather than conscious awareness and decisions, because they're more tiring for your brain. So let's say your brain runs everything through the filter of who it believes you to be, people pleaser. What are you going to do? You're going to do the thing that you think is going to please the people. Without conscious awareness of that, you're literally tied in. The next example is, I'm a control freak. And, people kind of say this one in jest, right? They're like, well, just a bit of a control freak. And it sounds fine, doesn't it? It sounds kind of like, oh, I'm just self-aware. I'm a bit of a control freak, I like to make sure everything's just so. I like to make sure everything's done my way. But imagine that Sarah labels herself a control freak. And then she has 3 people in her team who are waiting for her to delegate work to them. What happens next? When Sarah labels herself as a control freak, how do you think she feels delegating work to 3 people in her team? How do you think she feels when it comes back and, although correct, is not exactly how she would have done it? Is she more likely to just think, do you know what? It's just easier and quicker to do it myself, and therefore end up with way too much work and completely overwhelmed with 3 people more twiddling their thumbs? When Sarah believes herself to be a control freak, what happens next? She controls things, either with her mind, with her input in other people's work. You could become a micromanager. You could create work for yourself. You may not learn how to delegate. You might not be able to let anything go. If you really believed yourself to be a control freak, that is a lot of pressure, because that means you have to control everything, including other people, not just yourself. Example number 3 is, I'm a perfectionist. What happens when you label yourself perfectionist? Let's look at this example. Tom has a piece of work to do. He's never done this piece of work before, and he's been asked to prepare a first draft. However, when you think you're a perfectionist, how do you feel about first drafts? How do you feel about a starter for 10? Probably not that great. So when Tom's given this new piece of work that he's never done before and asked to prepare a starter for 10 and a draft, what happens? Well, he thinks, I can't get that perfect and I need to, so I'll put it off. He metaphorically pushes that piece of work to the side of his desk and busies himself with emails and other things that don't really move anything forward. When he does finally get to it, he tells himself, you're not going to be able to do this perfectly. Even if he's not aware of that thought floating through his mind, he tries to perfect everything, do research on every tiny little bit, and the job takes him 10 times longer than it might have taken somebody else. He then doesn't want it to be delayed, so he ends up staying late for work and missing the thing that he wanted to do on a Thursday evening. He tries so hard to get that starter for 10 draft perfect, whilst the whole time telling himself that he can't, and in brackets, how could he possibly, because he's never done the thing before. Then he's extremely upset at the feedback which comes back, which says, yeah, good start, but we need to do this, 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 and this. And he thinks, oh, I missed my standard. I didn't get everything perfect. Now, I don't wish to take the piss out of Tom here, but I use that as an example to illustrate what can happen when you believe yourself to be a perfectionist. When you hold that label, the automatic pattern that your brain's going to run on is perfect or nothing. Sometimes you might think that's appropriate, but sometimes you're really not going to think that's appropriate, especially when you're doing a first draft of something you've never done before. So what do you notice about those examples? I notice that labels can be a good shorthand for your brain to know which patterns and which predictions to run, which unconscious behavior to adopt in a given. So It's time to think more generally about what happens when we apply a label to ourselves. Sometimes I think labels could be helpful. So, one of the ones that I gave myself on purpose years ago, I used to have lots of problems with having too many things that I was thinking of. I would become overwhelmed. I wouldn't be able to finish any of them. So, I would start loads of things and then not finish them. And that led to my confidence being quite reduced in myself and my ability to kind of see something through and finish it. My label was I can't finish anything. That was my identity. That's what I thought about myself. And when I realized that was going to really get in the way of me actually fixing it, I started to say, well, I'm very disciplined. And it sounds crazy, but it started to have an impact. And I remember years later, my mum saying to me, oh, you're very disciplined. Me thinking, oh, yeah. I remember years ago thinking that that was a label that I could apply to myself. I don't apply it to myself anymore. But there's a potential that you can use a label like that to help you get something that you want. And I'm not talking about affirmations, which I don't really do because I don't know, if you do them and they work for you, great. But I just think repeating things you don't actually believe is not that helpful. So if you're going to select a label, then find some evidence for where it's actually already true in your life. And I could find evidence for where disciplined was actually true. I brush my teeth every day. I always have a wash. I'd gone through uni when I found it really hard and I didn't want to. I'd done my A levels when I found it hard and I didn't want to. I'd stuck at jobs I didn't want to do before. I'd got up at 6 a.m. every morning, right? There was evidence in my life all over for where I was disciplined. I was just seeing all the evidence where I wasn't. So if you're going to pick a label, find a place where it's actually already true in your life. And when I challenge clients to do this, very often they can come up with evidence for it. But what I see happening when people label themselves negatively is it can be a real self-fulfilling prophecy. So some people will say you behave in accordance with who you believe yourself to be. So if I believe myself to be a very fun person, I'm probably going to take the fun option. I'm probably going to do some fun things. But if I believe myself to be very serious, I'm probably not going to do that. If I believe myself to be boring, I'm probably not going to start an interesting conversation with someone. And it's going to be the same for you. So if you think you're a perfectionist, you're not going to be able to do a first draft very easily. If you think that you're shy, you're probably not going to be able to have a conversation with somebody who you don't know. It is such a self-fulfilling prophecy. And number two is it makes it harder for you to change. So if you have something that you want to change, having a negative label associated with it is going to make it harder for you to change. So here's what I want you to do. Do an exercise, and this can be like on the back of a fag paper, wherever, in the notes in your phone. Just take an inventory of the labels that you currently give yourself. What are those things you say about yourself? What do you find slipping out of your mouth? You maybe not even noticing. Who is it that you think you are? Write those things down because I want you to really become aware of them. Or even if you think there's labels that other people have given me, which I've kind of taken on, I've inherited, and I've kept with me, write those down too. And after you've written them down, I want you to really challenge and say, what actually happens when I believe this? What impact does that have on me? And is it even true? Do I act this way in every situation? Your brain might be applying a shortcut label, but there might be loads of examples of where this thing just simply isn't true. So you probably shouldn't be labeled that way at all. And then decide what you're going to do next. You want to keep the label or not? And if you decide not to, then watch your mouth. Watch all the hypnotic suggestion you're giving yourself every time you say, well, I'm just a people pleaser. You're suggesting to your unconscious mind that you, in fact, must please people all the time because that's not just what you do, it's in fact who you are. And that's just one example. So watch your mouth. Watch what you're saying about yourself. It will be having an impact. All right, that is all I have for you this week, other than to invite you, if you are a female professional, to come and join us in the Members Club. So we have our founding members in the Members Club now. And you can come and join us too. So I will leave a link in the show notes to give you all the info about what you get when you join the members club. So included in your membership is 6 training workshops a year. Our first one is going to be Grow Your Professional Confidence. And then there's going to be anything related to your professional development, like speaking up, handling conflict and challenge. So you get 6 training workshops a year. You get 2 live coaching calls a month where you can bring your challenges, bring the problems, bring the stuff that you're having, bring the learning that you're struggling to embed and get coached on it, and listen to other people getting coached too. Then there is a learning library, which you can have on your desktop and on an app on your phone. And that's got training videos for your professional development, including Confident at Work, which is our signature course, and a private podcast. So you can listen back to things whenever and wherever you are. If you're a woman professional, come and join us in the members club. You can join for a quarter or a year. All right. I will see you in next week's episode. Bye.